On the other hand, I think Nikki Haley, presumably because she's in a political primary and didn't want to offend maybe who she perceives as to be Republican voters, refused to say the S word when she said, what causes slavery.
I
The
love
war
it.
was ridiculous.
The S word.
Which is ridiculous. And, I hope we haven't gotten to the point where we can't discuss history in political campaigns, but
Mr. Lowenstein, let's return to Ms. Haley's statement, which she essentially retracted later. I think she said something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing here, of course, slavery caused the Civil War. That's my interest is not to talk about that. In your January 2nd newsletter on Substack, which I subscribe to and love, you had this this line, quote, "If the causes of great events could be fitted into single sentences, we would not need history books," unquote. So, yeah, how do we communicate the complexities of histories nowadays?
very self-serving since I read history books. But I think Republicans, but also some Democrats, particularly in the far left, have gotten themselves in sort of an unnecessary bind or war of sound bites. So what Nikki Haley is, there's sort of two extreme views, and one of them I think was represented in the New York Times as 1619 Project, where they basically said anything that happened in American history was due to slavery. I mean, that's a paraphrase, but it's a pretty faithful paraphrase, and that's obviously not true. I mean, Thomas Edison invented the light bulb; it has everything to do with slavery. I mean, I don't want to make the whole show about that. And there were many other divisions that divided North and South, as we talked about, the sort of all these other economic divisions, and there was this whole issue of preserving the Union, which was the immediate reason why Lincoln and the North went to war. But that doesn't mean So I think the people on the far left. There's no need to overstate the case. I mean, slavery was the huge issue between these sectors, and nobody is or nobody should be disputing that. And on the other hand, I think Nikki Haley, presumably because she's in a political primary and didn't want to offend maybe who she perceives as to be Republican voters, refused to say the S word when she said, what causes slavery. The war was ridiculous.
The S word.
Which is ridiculous. And, I hope we haven't gotten to the point where we can't discuss history in political campaigns, but if politicians want to wade in, then there's no need to have to do it in a soundbite. And hopefully whoever they're talking to will quote them or air them at some length. History can be complicated, and we learn from its complexity. It's rich, and we shouldn't shy away. I remember I said the Civil War was really two steps. The South seceded, and that was because of the fear that the Republicans would be too harsh on slavery, and the North went to war to preserve the Union.
Yeah,
and those are different, and if you try to oversimplify things, then you sacrifice a good deal of accuracy and understanding.
And let me ask you a bigger question about our country. I often hear this from other scholars. They talk about even countries that are oppressed, such as the Middle East. They talk about how society, not just the scholarly elite, society engages in intellectual conversations about philosophy, history, and what. They even have classes that are oversubscribed. Do you think that in America we've lost the taste for that? Maybe that was back in the 1960s, that we just don't really do that anymore.
I think there are still, you mean intellectual discussions and so on? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah. I have people that once in a while comment about scholars that are on my program, and they disagree with them with such passion. It's like, here's this scholar who's written 16 books on the subject. What part of it do you disagree with?
I think we still have tremendous scholars in this country. They're lots of people enrolled at universities. Some of them take their studies very seriously. Some of them continue to be very interested. I think we've lost a little bit of the ability to disagree with each other in with some sort of suppleness or flexibility, recognition that history is complicated. There isn't necessarily, one view. I mean, there's some expressions come up involving. It came up during COVID. It's come up during climate change. The science. You really talk about the science, and actually, science is not a the. It's an evolving process. If you talk to a scientist about um, how they think about things, there's a hypothesis. They go with it. After a while, someone has another hypothesis, and it keeps adjusting. I mean, after all, Einstein proved Newton wrong,
Yeah.
and Einstein, part of Einstein's theory now. Quantum theory has replaced part of Einstein. I
Yeah.
don't want to lose all of our readers with with quantum physics,
Yeah.
and lose myself too. But but when we tend to think of, we think back to the pandemic. The CD was continuously saying, we think this, and then some weeks later, some months later, you know, findings changed. We knew more. We were 2 months into the pandemic, then
But
six.
that's a good thing. That's not a
And
bad
that's a
thing.
good thing. That's
Yeah.
a good thing. And but when you say the science, as if it's the Talmud or the Bible, there's only one Bible. There's only one Old Testament. There's only one New Testament. It'll
Yeah.
never change. It's immutable, and that's immutable. You can't argue with that.
Their
But science,
interpretation could change.
yes, science is not immutable. And if you think about it as immutable, then people become more rigid and inflexible. And I think I just use the example of science.
Yeah.
I think that's entered into too many discussions. And that's why, you know, Thanksgiving used to be an easy time for families. And now it's like, well, Uncle Joe's coming and Aunt Sarah, they don't get along. We better, politically, we
Yeah,
better.
politically, yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. Mr. Lowenstein, thank you so much for educating me and our listeners. And to our listeners, if you know of any history that could provide more perspective from the past on this subject, please share it with us and tell us what's your perspective. Thanks very much.
Adel, always my pleasure.